In 1976, the Olingas returned to their homeland in Uganda for the joyous occasion of the marriage of his eldest son, George, and pioneer Farouk Esfani. It was a day of uniting Persian and African cultures in the fragrant gardens of the Baha'i Temple of Kampala. Abdul-Baha encouraged intermarriage, saying, "There is no greater means to bring about affection between the whites and the blacks than the influence of the Word of God." Likewise, marriage between these two races will wholly destroy and eradicate the root of enmity. The vibrant beating of the African drums and the festive dancing only compounded the joy that the Olingas and friends felt on this blessed day surrounding the Mother Temple of Africa. On the following day, the entire entourage left for the 6-hour journey to Tiling. The people of Teso greeted the wedding party along the way to join in the celebration. Enoch Olinga welcomed the couple to repeat the wedding ceremony in his native village. He tenderly extended his warmth, love, and happiness to every family member, friends, and his beloved wife, Elizabeth. The great joy brought to the Olinga family would soon give way to more difficult days ahead.
In 1977, Hand of the Cause of God Enoch Olinga and his wife Elizabeth returned to Uganda to be with the friends and protect the Baha'i properties during the growing crisis throughout the land. Mr. Wafula recalls Enoch Olinga's meeting with the Guardian, foreshadowing the events to come.
Uganda, Kampala being the spiritual heart of Africa, how one day the spiritual heart of Africa will be attacked and be due to political power struggle. This will result into Uganda suffering. When the heart of a human being, he said, is attacked, Mr. Olinga, what happens? Then what happens? The body collapses. No way. So that is what would happen that time. When the spiritual heart of Africa, the friends will be shaken and scatter, and many of them will disappear. Mr. Olinga, when the friends scatter like that, will they come back, or this kind of thing? But then the beloved Guardian said, so when summer comes, what happens to the trees, the leaves of the trees? They get dry, and then they drop. And after dropping, and when spring comes, autumn, spring comes, what happens? They start budding, and then they become green as before. The beloved Guardian said that is what would happen to the Baha'is. Those Baha'is who will scatter, who will disappear, and so on, later on they will come back, and the faith will grow again, will grow from strength to strength.
The faith was banned in Uganda. I was the first to go to Mr. Olinga's home, knelt beside his bed and woke him up. He was resting in the late afternoon. And I told him that, Mr. Olinga, the faith has been banned in Uganda. He turned on the other side and started crying. And he said, go in the sitting room, I'll get dressed, I'll come and talk to you, and we'll decide what we can do. So I went in the sitting room, and he came. He was by then composed, and he said, where do we start? So we decided by starting to go and see Aunt Claire, who was a pioneer and was living alone at a school. So we went to Aunt Claire's home with Mr. Olinga, and we said, Aunt Claire, do you know what has happened? I said, oh, no, it isn't the Baha'i faith. It is these small sects that have been banned. And Mr. Olinga said, Aunt Claire, it is also the Baha'i faith. And Claire refused to listen. He said, no, 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 it's all right. Then Mr. Olinga got hold of my hand and said, Edith, let's go. Aunt Claire will be all right. After that, we came and walked around the temple, and we saw that everything was quiet, and he took me to my home. I brought in this story because some time before Mr. Olinga's death, he called me by name 3 times, and he said, Edith, 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 as you knelt beside my bed to tell me about the burning of the faith, this is how you will kneel beside my dead body. And I said, Mr. Olinga, why do you say that? Maybe I'll die before you do. And he repeated it 3 times. And it was only after he had been killed that we rushed to his home, and I was kneeling where his body was, and I was crying. This is when I remembered what he had told me. And I have always wondered how he knew how it was going to be.
Throughout the 2 years the Baha'i faith was banned during the Civil War, the Friends suffered terribly, but remained obedient to the edict. Enoch Olinga personally cared for the temple grounds with his own hands. One night a fierce artillery battle raged around the Temple Hill in Kampala, and Enoch Olinga spent the whole night praying. In the morning, the government had been defeated, and the temple was safe.
In April 1979, even though chaos, violence, and looting continued in the capital, the ban was lifted. Enoch Olinga joyously reopened the Baha'i temple for public worship.
And in the temple, Mr. Olinga loved to organize the music. We had a group of youth who could sing, and he would just mobilize youth and start to conduct singing himself in the temple, so that next morning he sees that the music in the temple is proper.
The Universal House of Justice appointed an interim committee to oversee the Baha'i activities until the National Spiritual Assembly could once again be elected.
You may well expect that after the banning of the faith was lifted in 1979 with the fall of Idi Amin, how grateful we were to have the opportunity to, come together again as a Baha'i community. But I was very, very surprised, and shocked to hear that I had been nominated to be among the 5 members of the administrative committee. I was a very young woman at the time. But I remember that Mr. Olinga was really a very warm and encouraging individual. We didn't realize it then, but he was such very supportive. He did not make me, for instance, feel that being a woman and a young woman at that I was inadequate. I always felt confident, and he made me feel that I could serve on the administrative committee. So this young administrative committee had the privilege of only something like 5 months of the guidance of the hand of the cause, and then he was not there anymore. We felt like, little chicks which had been left on their own, and it was not a very easy time. With the help of Baha'u'llah, we did manage to, organize the funeral of Mr. Olinga, but also to go on to organize the convention which established the National Spiritual Assembly.
In September, a family reunion was planned to celebrate. Enoch was so happy during these last precious days.
My fondest memory is when we're all together as a family in the evenings. We usually got together and sang songs, and it was really a joyous moment. Those are the memories I like to remember most of the time. Because Enoch Olinga always spoke about being devoted to the faith of Baha'u'llah. and he stresses many times, and said you have to be devoted to Baha'u'llah to not only teach the faith but to live the life.
My father, Enoch Olinga, was a man with a very big heart. He was very loving, kind, gentle, and very dedicated to the faith and to the family. And our home was always open to everybody. And in the days when things were really, really bad in Uganda during the Civil War and everybody was scared, Baha'is and non-Baha'is, one of the things people said who were not even Baha'is was being in the home of Enoch Olinga would be the place to be safe. And it's really sad to see that that was the place that tragically took the lives of my father and my family, the person who was really the most peaceful and peace-loving individual.
Mr. Olinga was always willing and ready to help others. In fact, that Sunday, when he was killed with his family, we were here on the temple grounds after the temple service. And we had a meeting with the friends who were coming from up country. And Mr. Olinga was so happy and joyous. He got up, he sang, he danced, and called all of us to join him.
He sacrificed by traveling all over the world. He was always away from his family. While we ourselves, a family is a great tie. I can't leave my children, I can't. His home was open to everybody. He loved everybody. He was a friend of the youth, and he could converse with the people of all races, all classes. He had conversation for all people of classes. And when you are in his presence, you think that I am the only one who is most beloved. And when another comes, I'm going to Mr. Olinga, he is my father. And I remember the day when he was killed. Everybody came crying, oh, my father, my father, my father. One evening, Mr. Ule went to the hand of the cause at Kitante. Hand of the cause told him to stay for supper. He said, no, it isn't safe to travel here at night. So immediately he left. A boy had someone shaking the gate. He looked out in the window. He saw 4 armed people entering in, and he hid. Immediately he heard the shootings. This is how he said. And then he heard shouting. Everybody in the house was shouting. When the shouting stopped, it means that everybody in the house was shot dead. So at dawning, that boy went to the police and reported that everybody in Mr. Olinga's house have been shot dead. And he had a taxi and came up to the hill of the Baha'i temple. He found Mr. Ule, who was by then a counselor. Mr. Ule drove to Edith's house, Edith Senoga, who is now a counselor. Then they came to my house, Catherine. When they told me the story, my heart helped me to prevent it not to receive the news, even if the ears could hear. They told me to dress up, and we went. So we went on the way, weeping, very sorrowful, very disturbed. When I found Mr. Olinga lying on the floor, I thought there's still something we can do to rescue his life. I lifted up his head, and I found insects in his mouth. There I lost my mind. There were armed soldiers round about. I started pointing at them, that's still killing innocent people. Don't think that those bullets and guns will bring peace in the world. It is religion which will bring peace in the world, And this is what this man have been teaching.
I had been in that house, and I see it clearly in my mind's eye that his family was taken first, and that he was running towards the commotion, and all of his thoughts were for his family, and that his last thoughts were for his family. And I know that if they had been coming for him, and if he had known they were coming for him, he would have opened his arms and gone out and embraced them as brothers. He would have joyfully and gladly given his life.
The message of the passing away of the hand of the cause of God found us while we were in Nairobi. That morning we had a shopping list he had given us, and we had bought about half the amount of things he required, and we decided to take those back to the Baha'i Center and then continue. It was at this time that Mr. Wafula handed me a letter, and I got the letter and put it in the dashboard of the car, and he insisted that I read it. My reaction to that was it that urgent that I should go through it at that moment, or I could do it later? He asked me to read it immediately, and so I did. And in this letter, the news of the death of my father was indicated, and the members of the family, and of course the condolence of the friends in Kenya. My reaction to this was, first there was quite a bit of silence, and Farouk looked at me and didn't know what to do. But then I told Mr. Wafula I'll just go to town for a drive and come back. He wasn't very pleased with that idea. So Mr. Peter Vuyier requested that if I had to go to town, he will accompany me. So we went together, and I didn't have much or anything to do in town. I just wanted some time to drive around and reflect on what steps to take next. So on our return back, I told Farouk we should just pack up and then leave for Uganda, which we did. And that night we spent the night in Kisumu. We met the Kenyan friends, Mr. and Mrs. Obora, and I was able to communicate to Mr. Ali Nakjavani that night, indicating to him our plans. At the border the next morning, as the case is often done of checking vehicles, we were subjected to this, but we told the custom officials we were not in really good shape to be able to do that, and if they could just excuse us. And it's at that point we saw the headlines of the newspaper about the killing of Mr. Enoch Olinga, and we showed them what had taken place, and they felt so sorry and just waved us to go immediately and continue with the journey. And on arrival to Kampala, and we found all these Baha'is gathered at his home, it's when it actually dawned to us that they were no longer with us.
I went to Lesotho as a pioneer, and it was whilst in Lesotho that I met Peter, my husband. We got married in Lesotho, and we had our first child, Nabil, in the capital city, Maseru. And from Maseru, we sort of home front pioneered to a smaller place called Mafeteng. That's where Peter got a job teaching. And it was while we were in Mafeteng, and I was 6 months pregnant with our second son, Badi. Peter was at school, and he came home, and I wondered, why is he coming home? It's not lunchtime. And yeah, he sat me down and very gently, very lovingly broke the news to me. And it's funny because half an hour later, there was a car came from Maseru, which is the capital city. And it was from the Ugandan embassy that obviously got the news, and they knew I was in Mafeking, and it sent the Ugandan High Commissioner himself came to Mafeking to find us. And fortunately, I'd already heard the news through Peter, which was, I think, a blessing.
With grief-stricken hearts, announce tragic news, brutal murder, dearly loved, greatly admired, hand cause of God, Enoch Olinga, by unknown gunman, courtyard, his Kampala home. His wife Elizabeth and 3 children, Badi, Lenny, and Tahira, had also fallen innocent victims this cruel act. His radiant spirit, his unwavering faith, his all-embracing love, his leonine audacity in the teaching field, his titles, Knight of Baha'u'llah, Father of Victories conferred by the beloved guardian, all combine to distinguish him as preeminent member his race in annals of the faith on the African continent, the Universal House of Justice.
The death of my family was devastating to us. Words could never describe the effect the loss of our dear ones had to our family. It brought to, for me, it brought to the surface the reality that our life on this earth is a fleeting moment, and how important it is to do what we are here to do. And of course, that is to spiritualize our lives, to teach the faith, because in reality, nothing else really matters in the end. It's who we are, what we've done in this world, and that's all we'll be taking with us. And the death of my father, my young brothers and mother, really brought that to the surface for me and for my siblings. And I know that from the other world, he is looking out for us and praying for us and the grandchildren and for the friends. And even though he's not here, his spirit is with us. And he will always be missed tremendously.
The news of Enoch Olinga and members of his family's tragic death came as such an unexpected shock to the Baha'i World Center, and especially to the Universal House of Justice members. You know, the Universal House of Justice is the highest administrative institution of the Baha'i faith, where the Baha'is all over the world look for their love and guidance. So we were just in shock. Accompanying this tragedy, a week before, was the razing of the Bab's home in Shiraz. The Bab, of course, being the prophet who announced the coming of Baha'u'llah. So we have the twin prophets of the Bab and Baha'u'llah in the Baha'i faith. His sacred home had been totally destroyed by what was also going on at that time, the Islamic Revolution, where the Baha'is were being picked up, imprisoned, martyred, tortured. Ali Nachivani, a member of the Universal House of Justice, said, at that time, the Baha'i World Center was a community in mourning.
It made me very sad when we heard about the death of Mr. Olinga. But at the same time, you know, he died in very tragic and difficult circumstances, but it really seemed to me to be reflective of his life as well, that he had given to the faith completely. He was devoted and was a tireless teacher of the faith, and in that same way he steadfastly was at his post teaching, carrying out the instructions and the directives of the House of Justice. And you know, like many other Baha'is and many of the other martyrs, he ultimately gave his life. it reminds me of one of the other very early African believers, Eduardo Vieira, who was considered the first African martyr. He was from Guinea-Bissau. And it's amazing that we're still so close to that time period that we probably really, I think, don't fully appreciate the legacy that they have left for us in blazing the trail and opening up those countries to the faith, which now we see so many burgeoning Baha'i communities today.
His death came unexpectedly and tragically and pointlessly. It was a great shock to everyone in the Baha'i community around the world, I'm sure. I think to me it pointed up the fact that of the great need for the revelation of Baha'u'llah to eradicate the things that lead to such acts, because they don't stand alone and by themselves, but as something that comes from a system that is definitely defective. We can grieve for his passing, and yet we know his life was spent in serving the cause he loved, and that he is in a better place. We have to stay and work here on this earthly plane.
I think I never felt more sad than at the death of Enoch Olinga. Because just to see his face in my mind now gives me strength and love. He was love personified. He gave us, he wrote out in his own handwriting a beautiful prayer that he said Abdu'l-Baha had, it was a prayer of Abdu'l-Baha that had been given to him when he was in the Holy Land. And it was one that he always asked his wife to say for him when he was traveling in Africa. And all I remember of it now is that he said he would go over mountains and so forth to teach the faith, and that he asked God to give him tests. But please, O God, in the hour of test, give me strength. And when he died, when we knew that his life had come to such a tragic end, that prayer came to my mind that, oh God, you were with him in the hour of test, I know.
Don't think, personally, I can forget Olinga. I don't think, no. Because the love, it's beyond my, I can't even give explanation about how he loved me, everybody. Not to me only, but whoever Olinga embraced, he would not feel it. I don't know. Unless that person, I've never been to World Center, but I think Mr. Olinga became my World Center, sorry.
Enoch Olinga's murder was recited to me by telephone on a telegram. I succumbed to physical, emotional grief, but went out later in the streets of the Caribbean island where I was living, amongst the people of color there. I'm remembering how Mr. Olinga had been one person in Uganda and had discovered Baha'u'llah's revelation, and how empowered and transformed and how huge his spirit had become to encompass the peoples of the world and beyond. I'm walking down the sidewalk, and every face of color that was passing me, I'm looking and saying, are you Enoch Olinga? I'm thinking, every single person has to be able to hear about the revelation of Baha'u'llah. We don't know what God knows about what they have to offer. God knew about Enoch Olinga and somehow guided him to the path. And I'm looking to think, all these people, I have to tell them, is this one another Enoch Olinga? Are you Enoch Olinga? Are you Enoch Olinga? That stays with me today. Thank you, God, because the desire to teach, the desire to be open to the spirit of teaching so that I can find or be in the company of one whose soul, whose spirit, whose history, whose energy, whose life could become as Enoch Olinga.
One of the last holidays we spent with Papa Olinga and Mama Elizabeth was in Kampala home. And one day he shared with us one of the mystical dream of his, which he had a night before. He called us in the sitting room and he told us that he dreamed he ascended to the next world. And he was so surprised seeing Bach, Einstein, and Beethoven. They were so busy. They were working so hard and composing music. So he asked them, "What are you doing?" They said, "The same thing we have been doing in the earth." He was surprised. And he said, "But I thought when we come to the next world, we are going to rest, and there is no more work." Beethoven laughed and said, "In fact, you need to work harder in the next world, and there is no rest." And then Papa Olinga asked, "But why? Why is it like that?" He said, "Because we are supposed to inspire the people on the earth, so be ready to work harder." Papa Olinga was so beautifully telling us, bringing to our attention, and he said, "Do you understand what does that mean?" We looked, and several times he repeated, and he said, "You know, I thought that I'm going to be resting. You know, children, I'm very tired. I have been traveling, I have been teaching the faith. I am tired. And I thought I will go and rest." And then he broke to laughter and said, "It seems there is no rest here, and we need to." And then he suddenly said, changed his voice, and he said, "Well, if that is the wish of Baha'u'llah, then let's work hard. Pray for me."